If I were asked the title of my address to you today, I would say, above all else, do not lie. Or, don't lie too often. Which is really to say, tell the truth. But lying, the word, the idea, the act, has such political potency in America today that it somehow feels more apt. Above all else, do not lie. I grew up in Nigeria through military dictatorships and through incipient democracies. And America always felt aspirational. When yet another absurd thing happened politically, we would say, this can never happen in America. But today, the political discourse in America includes questions that are straight from the land of the absurd. Questions such as, should we call a lie a lie? When is a lie a lie? And so, class of 2018, at no time has it felt as urgent as now that we must protect and value the truth. So before I tell you about not lying, I must first admit to lying. I routinely lie about my height, even at the doctor's office. In Lagos, when I'm meeting friends for lunch, I lie about being stuck in traffic when I'm really still at home, only just getting dressed. But what I know is that I have always felt my best and done my best when I veer toward truth, when I don't lie. And the biggest regrets of my life are of those times when I did not have the courage to embrace the truth. Now, telling the truth does not mean that everything will work out. Actually, it sometimes doesn't. I'm not asking you to tell the truth because it will always work out, but because you will sleep well at night. And there is nothing more beautiful than to wake up every day holding in your hand the full measure of your integrity. Many years ago, before my first novel was published, I attended a writers' conference here in the US. It was a gathering of many aspiring writers and a few established writers. Now, the former, the aspiring writers, sucking up to the latter, the established writers, was a revered ritual of the conference. And so, during one of the breaks, I walked up to a man, an established writer, whose name I knew well, but whose work I had not read. I shook his hand and told him what a fan I was. "I love your work," I said. His wife was sitting next to him. "So, which of his books have you read?" she asked, and I froze. "Which have you read?" she asked again. Everyone at the table was quiet, watching, waiting. I smiled a mad smile, and I mumbled, the one about the man discovering himself," which of course was complete. But I thought it might be convincing, since that kind of describes half of all the novels written by men. And then I fled. But before I fled, I heard the writer say to his wife, "Honey, you shouldn't have done that." But the truth is that I shouldn't have done that. To read a novel is to give honor to art. Why lie about giving honor to something to which you have not? I was, of course, absolutely mortified that day, but I have come to respect what that writer's wife had: a fantastic detector. And now that I have the good fortune of being an established writer, one who does not like to miss an opportunity to wallow in praise, by the way, I can sense when a person is saying empty words, and it feels much worse than if they had said nothing at all. So have a good detector. If you don't have it now, work on it. But having that detector means that you must also use it on yourself. And sometimes the hardest truths are those we have to tell ourselves. When I first started sending out my early writing to agents and publishers and started getting rejections, I convinced myself that my work had simply not found the right home. Which might have been true, but there was another truth that took me much longer to consider, that the manuscript was not very good. And in fact, the first novel I wrote, or what I thought was a novel, eventually needed to be put away in a drawer. And I'm so grateful that it was never published. It is hard to tell ourselves the truth about our failures, our fragilities, our uncertainties. It is hard to tell ourselves that maybe we haven't done the best that we can. It is hard to tell ourselves the truth of our emotions, that maybe what we feel is hurt rather than anger. That maybe it is time to close the chapter of a relationship and walk away. And yet when we do, we are the better off for it. I understand that the Harvard College mission calls on you to be citizen leaders. I don't even know what citizen leader means. It sort of sounds like a Harvard graduate saying, I went to college in Boston. Which, by the way, has to be the most immodest form of modesty. Please, class of 2018, when you're asked where you went to college, just say Harvard. By the way, I went to Yale for graduate school, not New Haven, which has other universities. But we also know that in the grand snobbery sweepstakes of prestigious American colleges, grad school doesn't really count. It's undergrad that counts. So it's entirely possible that I don't even know how all of this works. So you're charged to be citizen leaders, which I suppose means that you're charged to be leaders. I often wonder who will be led if everyone is supposed to be a leader. But whether you are a leader or whether you are the led, I urge you always to bend toward truth, to err on the side of truth. And to help you do this, make literature your religion. Which is to say, read widely, read fiction and poetry and narrative nonfiction. Make the human story the center of your understanding of the world. Think of people as people, not as abstractions who have to conform to bloodless logic, but as people, fragile, imperfect, with prides that can be wounded and hearts that can be touched. Literature is my religion. I have learned from literature that we humans are flawed. All of us are flawed. But even while flawed, we are capable of enduring goodness. We do not need first to be perfect before we can do what is right and just. And you, Harvard class of 2018, are not unfamiliar with speaking the truth. When you stood alongside dining hall workers during the strike, when you protested the end of DACA, when you supported the Black Lives Matter movement, you were speaking the truth about the dignity that every single human being deserves. I applaud you. I urge you to continue. But remember that now, outside the cocoon of Harvard, the consequences will be greater. The stakes will be higher. Please don't let that stop you from telling the truth. Sometimes, especially in politicized spaces, telling the truth will be an act of courage Be courageous. Never set out to provoke for the sake of provoking, but never silence yourself out of fear that a truth you speak might provoke. Be courageous. People can be remarkably resistant to the facts that they do not like, but don't let that silence you from speaking the truth. Be courageous. Be courageous enough to acknowledge that even if there is no value in the position of the other side, there is value in knowing what that position is. Listen to the other side, at least the reasonable other side. Be courageous enough to acknowledge that democracy is always fragile and that justice has nothing to do with the political left or the political right. Be courageous enough to recognize those things that get in the way of telling the truth: the empty cleverness, the morally bankrupt irony, the desire to please, the deliberate obfuscation, the tendency to confuse cynicism for sophistication. Be courageous enough to accept that life is messy. Your life will not always perfectly match your ideology. Sometimes even your choices will not align with your ideology. Don't justify and rationalize it. Acknowledge it. Because it is in trying to justify that we get into that twisting, dark, unending tunnel of lies from which it is sometimes impossible to re-emerge whole. Be courageous enough to say, I don't know. This might be harder to do with everyone calling you Harvard, but ignorance acknowledged is an opportunity. Ignorance denied is a closed door. And it takes courage to admit to the truth of what you do not know.